Hello? Baby?
Running wild, lost control, running wild, mighty bold, feeling gay, reckless too, carefree mind all the time, never blue, always going, don't know where, always showing, I don't care, don't love nobody, it's not worthwhile, all alone. Running wild.
And here we see these lights coming directly toward us.
If you're like me, you pay attention to the news. I enjoy being informed. And so if you're like me, cannot help but notice the prevalence and indeed the frequency of stories about UFOs. Stories of the government acknowledging people taking responsibility like important people. 2021, the Pentagon released a report on UAP. The term is preferred to UFO by much of the extraterrestrial community, which found more than 140 instances of UAP encounters that could not be explained. The report followed a leak of military footage which showed apparently inexplicable happenings in the sky while Navy pilots testified that they had frequently had encounters with strange craft off the U.S. coast. So, today we are joined by Clive Christopher.
You stay here as long as you like.
Jack may have beaten Tony to the sugar, but not for long.
You're not giving yourself a chance. Don't fight it. Relax.
John F. Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe had a rumored relationship in the early 60s. While some reports suggest that they had a romantic involvement, others suggest that they were simply acquaintances. The exact details and extent of their relationship remain unclear and have been a subject of much speculation and debate. It's important to note that due to the passage of time and lack of concrete evidence, the true nature of their relationship may never be definitively known. The rumored relationship between JFK and Marilyn Monroe had several impacts. First, it increased public fascination with both individuals, drawing significant media attention. It also added to the intrigue and mystique surrounding their lives. It's believed that after the Camp David meeting, President Kennedy shared some of those details between him and former President Eisenhower with Marilyn Monroe. The biggest topic that JFK supposedly discussed with Marilyn Monroe is the alien treaty that was signed under the Eisenhower administration, and that the United States was secretly working with extraterrestrials in exchange for knowledge and technology to defeat the Soviet Union. It's also rumored that Marilyn Monroe gave President Kennedy the idea to work with the Soviet Union, forming a joint space exploration missions and sharing the information that is learned, developing communications amongst one another. It is important to note that the lasting impact of their rumored relationship, it's somewhat subjective and difficult to measure precisely. While it has undoubtedly contributed to their respective legacies, the significance and ramifications may vary depending on various interpretations and personal beliefs. In June of 1961, President John F. Kennedy had a historic meeting with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev in Vienna, Austria. The meeting took place from June 3rd to June 4th and is often referred to as the Vienna Summit.
The site of Vienna in the spring of 1961 is that of an historic city fully recovered from the ravages of World War II. The capital of Austria, whose independence and neutrality was guaranteed by the great powers in the Austrian State Treaty of 1955. Now, in the spring of 1961, Vienna offered its hospitality for a personal meeting between two world leaders against a background of historic landmarks. This was the scene at Vienna's airport when President Kennedy's plane arrived on the morning of Saturday, June 3rd. The world, beset by problems of Berlin and Laos, nuclear testing and disarmament, looked to Vienna as the President of the United States arrived, greeted by Austrian President Adolf Scherff and Chancellor Alphonse Gorbach. President Kennedy himself described his mission to Vienna.
I went to Vienna to meet the leader of the Soviet Union, Mr. Khrushchev. For 2 days, we met in sober, intensive conversation. Mr. Khrushchev and I had a very full and frank exchange of views on the major issues that now divide our two countries. I wanted to present our views to him directly, precisely, realistically, and with an opportunity for discussion and clarification. This was done.
As President Kennedy said in his report, this was not a summit meeting, but rather an informal exchange of views and a way of keeping open the channels of communication between the United States and the Soviet Union. One topic of discussion was the serious situation in Laos, of increasing concern to the peoples of the world. By its actions, the Soviet Union would have to show whether it supported a satisfactory settlement in Laos, where communist-backed factions were continuing hostilities against the royal government. President Kennedy reported a measure of agreement in Vienna.
Both sides endorsed the concept of a neutral and independent Laos, much in the manner of Burma or Cambodia. And of critical importance to the current conference on Laos in Geneva, both sides recognized the importance of an effective ceasefire.
The second meeting was held at the Soviet embassy. President Kennedy expressed America's desire for effective nuclear test controls and a disarmament agreement. Mr. Khrushchev's insistence on a Soviet veto over controls and on having disarmament precede inspection led Mr. Kennedy to express his disappointment.
In short, our hopes for an end to nuclear tests, for an end to the spread of nuclear weapons, and for some slowing down of the arms race have been struck a serious blow. But our most somber talks were on the subject of Germany and Berlin. I made it clear to Mr. Khrushchev that the security of Western Europe, and therefore our own security, are deeply involved in our presence and our access rights to West Berlin. But those rights are based on law, not on suffrance, and that we are determined to maintain those rights at any risk, and thus meet our obligation to the people of West Berlin and their right to choose their own future.
President Kennedy himself drew the balance of his two-day meeting with Chairman Khrushchev.
I will tell you now that it was a very sober 2 days. There was no discourtesy, no loss of tempers, no threats or ultimatums by either side. No advantage or concession was either gained or given. No major decision was either planned or taken. No spectacular progress was either achieved or pretended.
The Vienna Summit was significant as it was the first meeting between Kennedy and Khrushchev after Kennedy's election as President of the United States. The main purpose of this meeting was to improve relations between the two superpowers and address various Cold War issues. During the talks, Kennedy and Khrushchev discussed various critical topics, including the situation in Berlin, nuclear weapons testings, and the overall state of the United States and Soviet relations. One of the significant points of contention was the divided city of Berlin, which was the focal point of tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union at this time. Despite some optimistic discussions, the Vienna Summit did not yield significant agreements or concrete resolutions. Khrushchev took a tough stance and tried to exert pressure on Kennedy, perceiving him as inexperienced and weak. The meeting ended with no major breakthroughs, and tensions between the two nations remained high in the following months. The Vienna Summit did serve as an important opportunity for both leaders to gain insights into each other's positions, personalities, and negotiating styles. It laid the groundwork for future interactions and set the stage for subsequent events of the Cold War, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Overall, the Vienna Summit marked a critical point in the United States and Soviet relationship during the early 60s, shaping the dynamics and stakes of the Cold War. During the summit, Nikita Khrushchev presented several specific demands regarding Berlin to President Kennedy. Khrushchev sought to exert more control over West Berlin, which was under the administration of the United States, United Kingdom, and France. Some of his key demands included: he proposed that the Soviet Union and East Germany sign a peace treaty, which would effectively end the presence of Western powers in West Berlin. This move would have given the Soviet Union greater influence and control over the entire city. The Soviet leader wanted West Germany and its Western allies to formally recognize East Germany as a separate and sovereign state. By doing so, he aimed to legitimize East Germany's authority and undermine the position of West Germany and its Western allies in Berlin. Khrushchev demanded that Western powers allow the Soviet Union and East Germany to have more control over access routes to West Berlin. He sought to limit the freedom of movement and increase restrictions on the Western access to the city, potentially making it more difficult for residents, diplomats, and supplies to reach West Berlin. He also called for the withdrawal of Western military forces from West Berlin. It's important to note that these demands were part of Khrushchev's strategy to put pressure on the United States and its Western allies to influence the status and fate of Berlin. Kennedy and the Western powers did not agree to these demands, and tensions over Berlin escalated, eventually leading to events such as the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961.
The Freedom Bell in West Berlin tolls in sympathy for East Germans on the first anniversary of the Wall of Shame that holds them prisoners. It was just a year ago that authorities in communist Germany, appalled at the numbers who were fleeing to the west, threw up the wall. East German boss Ulbricht cut worshippers from their churches, separated parents from their children. But at the same time, he unwittingly united Germany as never before. On this anniversary, wreaths are placed where people died jumping to freedom. And at checkpoints, authorities are on the alert to prevent outbreaks among West Berliners who might seize on the anniversary to vent their wrath on East German guards. U.S. patrols check a segment of the 95-mile-long barrier. There are brief memorial services led by Mayor Willie Brandt in tribute to the scores who died seeking freedom. The slogan of the day among the West Berliners is marked on the cross, "We accuse." They march along the wall, a display of silent contempt for communist efforts to imprison their friends and relatives. At dusk, tensions erupt in a rock-throwing barrage. The police have their hands full and don't succeed in quieting the Westerners for some time. The anniversary day of the shameful wall.
The situation in Berlin was a major point of contention and a focal point of tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. At the time of the Vienna Summit in 1961, Berlin was a divided city, with the eastern part controlled by the Soviet-backed German Democratic Republic and the western part belonging to the Federal Republic of Germany, which was supported by the United States and its allies. West Berlin, in particular, was seen as a symbol of the democratic and capitalist world within a communist Eastern Europe. Khrushchev sought to pressure the United States and its allies to grant the Soviet Union more control over West Berlin. He threatened to sign a separate peace treaty with East Germany, which would effectively end the presence of Western powers in West Berlin and potentially lead to the division of the city under Soviet control. During the Vienna Summit discussions, Kennedy expressed his commitment to the defense and protection of West Berlin, emphasizing the United States' support for the rights and freedom of its citizens.
I am proud to come to this city as the guest of your distinguished mayor, who has symbolized throughout the world the fighting spirit of West Berlin. And I am proud to visit the Federal Republic with your distinguished Chancellor, who for so many years has committed Germany to democracy and freedom and progress, and to come here in the company of my fellow American, General Clay, who has been in this city during its great moments of crisis and will come again if ever needed. Two thousand years ago, the proudest post was Civis Romanus Sum. Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is Ich bin ein Berliner. I appreciate my interpreter translating my German.
Khrushchev remained firm in his demands and attempted to test Kennedy's resolve. The Berlin issue highlighted the broader tensions and ideological differences between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It underscored the struggle for influence and control in Europe, with Berlin serving as a symbolic battleground. Only a few months later, in August of 1961, the Soviet Union began constructing the Berlin Wall, physically dividing East and West Berlin and furthering the tensions between the two superpowers. The Berlin issue was a paramount importance during the Vienna Summit, as it represented a central point of contention between the United States and the Soviet Union. The discussions and lack of resolution on the Berlin crisis at the summit ultimately had implications that unfolded with the construction of the Berlin Wall and the ongoing geopolitical struggle of the Cold War.
There are many people in the world who really don't understand, or say they don't, what is the great issue between the free world and the communist world. Let them come to Berlin.
The most significant UFO case during this decade took place less than a month after the construction of the Berlin Wall on September 19, 1961. A couple known as the Hills took a road trip to Montreal and Niagara Falls. On the trip back home, Mrs. Hill noticed a bright light in the sky just south of Lancaster while driving on US Route 3. Initially, she thought she was observing a falling star, but upon further investigation, it moved upward and erratically, and she even reported that the light got bigger and brighter. She then begged her husband to stop the car for better observations and to allow their dog on a bathroom break. Mr. Hill began to slow down and stopped at a rest area that's located south of Twin Mountain. At this time, Mrs. Hill grabbed some binoculars, and what she observed was an unconventional craft that was emitting multiple colors of light as it traveled in front of the moon. Mrs. Hill immediately thought she was witnessing a flying saucer because her sister had mentioned seeing one years earlier, and what she described matched this craft. She then passes the binoculars to her husband, and he initially thought he was witnessing a commercial airliner that was heading towards Montreal. But then he quickly changed his mind because the craft made a quick and sudden turn and started heading in their direction before descending. The Hills got back in their car and began to drive on the dark, isolated road with caution as the object slowly moved towards them. Mrs. Hill stated that the object was bigger than the granite cliff, which was about 60 feet in length, and the object also appeared to be rotating as it moved erratically, bouncing back and forth through the night sky. About a mile south of a location called Indian Head, the couple stated that the craft quickly descended on their vehicle, causing Mr. Hill to come to a dead stop on the highway. They then watched the craft hover above their 1957 Chevy Bel Air. It sat about 80 feet from the ground, and they stated that it was big enough to cover the entire windshield view of their car. "It reminded me of a huge pancake," said Mr. Hill, as he walked away from his car and towards the identified craft. Using the binoculars, he said he observed up to 11 unusual figures that appeared to be looking directly at him. He then said all of the occupants of the craft began to move except one. This single being continued to monitor Mr. Hill's actions as it began to communicate with him, telling him not to move and to continue looking in that same direction. He noticed the beings were wearing black suits with matching headgear. Mr. Hill said this craft began to change its form less than 300 feet from him and 60 feet off the ground as it approached him and his wife. The Hills made it to their home sometime around dawn, when they both recognized they had some strange sensations and impulses they couldn't easily explain. Their watches never worked again, and Mrs. Hill wanted the luggage to be kept at the back door instead of the main section of the home. Mr. Hill also stated that the strap that was on the binoculars he was using was torn, and his favorite pair of dress shoes were severely scratched. The Hills then began to try to reconstruct the events of what they witnessed the night prior on their way home. They then quickly realized that after hearing the sound of the UFO, their memories lacked details of what happened afterwards. Mrs. Hill noticed that the dress she had worn that night was torn and had a pink substance on it as well. She has no recollection of what took place and caused her to rip her dress. During a 6-hour interview conducted by Walter N. Webb of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, the Hills reported everything that happened, including having memory block after the craft approached them. Mr. Hill stated that there were some portions of the event he wished he did not remember. The final conclusion drawn out by Walter Webb was that they were telling the truth, and what occurred probably happened exactly as they reported it, with some minor uncertainties, like the size of the craft and visibility. This incident has been featured in many books and movies. John F. Kennedy believed in the importance of maintaining a balance of power during the Cold War era. Despite tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union, Kennedy recognized the need for cooperation and dialogue between the two superpowers to prevent an escalation into nuclear war. He saw potential for collaboration in areas such as arms control, space exploration, and trade. Kennedy's efforts were aimed at easing tensions and fostering a more peaceful coexistence between the two nations. Kennedy implemented several strategies to ease tensions and promote dialogue with the Soviet Union. To ensure direct communication and prevent misunderstandings, Kennedy and Khrushchev established a direct hotline between the White House and the Kremlin. This allowed for quick communication during times of crisis and helped diffuse potential conflicts. Kennedy proposed cooperation with the Soviet Union on space exploration, which ultimately led to joint missions. These collaborative endeavors helped promote a sense of shared goals and scientific cooperation between the two nations. Overall, Kennedy pursued a combination of diplomatic negotiations, arms control agreements, and cooperative ventures to ease the tension with the Soviet Union and promote a more stable international environment.
Mr. President, Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe famously sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" on May 19, 1962 at Madison Square Garden in New York City.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
This performance became iconic and it's often associated with their supposed connection. There have been various rumors and speculation about a supposed event in where President Kennedy took Marilyn Monroe to an Air Force hangar. It is important to note that much of the information surrounding their relationship and specific events they were involved in can be speculative and based on unsubstantiated claims. While it is known that President Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe had a relationship, details of specific events may vary depending on the sources. It is always advisable to approach such accounts with a critical mindset and consider multiple perspectives. After this hangar visit, these are known as Monroe's final days. On the set of Marilyn Monroe's last movie, Monroe's involvement in the film faced some challenges. During the production of Something's Gotta Give, Marilyn Monroe struggled with personal issues and faced frequent absences from the set, causing delays and production problems. She was eventually fired from the movie due to her unreliability and conflicts in the studio. And it's also said that one of the people that was on set of this movie was a secret CIA agent. Despite the setbacks, Monroe was rehired after negotiations and the movie was set to continue. Unfortunately, she tragically passed away on August 5th, 1962, before the film could be completed. Only about 30 minutes of footage was shot with Monroe. Eventually, the movie was abandoned, and the project was never finished or released. The famous "We Choose to Go to the Moon" speech was delivered by President John F. Kennedy on September 12, 1962 at Rice University in Houston, Texas.
Mr. Vice President, Governor, Congressman Thomas, Senator Wiley and Congressman Miller, Mr. Webb, Mr. Bell, scientists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your President having made me an honorary visiting professor, and I will assure you that my first lecture will be very brief. I am delighted to be here, and I'm particularly delighted to be here on this occasion. We meet at a college noted for knowledge, in a city noted for progress, in a state noted for strength, and we stand in need of all three. For we meet in an hour of change and challenge, In a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance, the greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds. Despite the striking fact that most of the scientists that the world has ever known are alive and working today, despite the fact that this nation's own scientific manpower is doubling every 12 years in a rate of growth more than 3 times that of our population as a whole, despite that, the vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension. No man can fully grasp how far and how fast we have come. But condense, if you will, the 50,000 years of man's recorded history in a time span of but a half a century. Stated in these terms, we know very little about the first 40 years, except at the end of them, advanced man had learned to use the skins of animals to cover them. Then about 10 years ago, under this standard, man emerged from his caves to construct other kinds of shelter. Only 5 years ago, man learned to write and use a cart with wheels. Christianity began less than 2 years ago. The printing press came this year. And then less than 2 months ago, during this whole 50-year span of human history, the steam engine provided a new source of power. Newton explored the meaning of gravity. Last month, electric lights and telephones and automobiles and airplanes became available. Only last week did we develop penicillin and television and nuclear power. And now, if America's new spacecraft succeeds in reaching Venus, we will have literally reached the stars before midnight tonight.
This speech marked a significant moment in history of space exploration and set the United States on a path to reach the moon. President Kennedy expressed the importance of space exploration and highlighted the challenges it presented. He emphasized the need for the United States to take the lead in this endeavor, stating, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the things not because they are easy, but because they are hard."
So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are a little longer, to rest, to wait. But this city of Houston, this state of Texas, this country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them. This country was conquered by those who move forward, and so will space. William Bradford, speaking in 1630 of the founding of the Plymouth Bay Colony, said that all great and honorable actions are accompanied with great difficulties, and both must be enterprised and overcome with answerable courage. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great adventures of all time. And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space. Those who came before us made certain that this country rode the first waves of the Industrial Revolution, the first waves of modern invention, and the first wave of nuclear power. And this generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space. We mean to be a part of it. We mean to lead it.
President Kennedy recognized the impact of the space race on the country and stressed the importance of maintaining American supremacy in technology and innovation. He saw the exploration of space as a symbol of American values and aspirations. The speech outlined steps required for the United States to reach the moon, including the development of new spacecraft, rockets, and the involvement of scientists, engineers, and astronauts.
For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond. And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge and understanding. Yet the vows of this nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and therefore we intend to be first. In short, our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men, and to become the world's leading spacefaring nation. We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. For space science, like nuclear science and all technology, has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war. I do not say that we should or will go unprotected against the hostile misuse of space any more than we go unprotected against the hostile use of land or sea. But I do say that space can be explored and mastered without feeding the fires of war, without repeating the mistakes that man has made in extending his writ around this globe of ours. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
President Kennedy rallied support for this ambitious goal, urging the nation to support the significant financial and resource investment required. The "We Choose to Go to the Moon" speech became a defining moment in American history and inspired a generation of scientists, engineers, and astronauts. It signaled the United States' commitment to technological advancements
of a large scientific and engineering community. During the next 5 years, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration expects to double the number of scientists and engineers in this area, to increase its outlays for salaries and expenses to $60 million a year, to invest some $200 million in plant, and laboratory facilities, and to direct or contract for new space efforts over $1 billion from this center in this city.
It was a huge step towards the future and becoming leaders in the space race. However, lingering issues were on the horizon.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. Only last Thursday, as evidence of this rapid offensive buildup was already in my hand, Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko told me in my office that he was instructed to make it clear once again, as he said his government had already done, that Soviet assistance to Cuba, and I quote, pursued solely the purpose of contributing to the defense capabilities of Cuba, unquote. That, and I quote him, training by Soviet specialists of Cuban nationals in handling defensive armaments was by no means offensive. And that if it were otherwise, Mr. Gromyko went on, the Soviet government would never become involved in rendering such assistance, unquote. That statement also was false. Acting therefore in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution, as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations. I call upon him further to abandon this course of world domination and to join in an historic effort to end the perilous arms race and to transform the history of man. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved.
The Cuban Missile Crisis was a major confrontation between the United States, the Soviet Union, and Cuba in October of 1962. It was a tense period of about 13 days where the world came close to nuclear war. In 1961, the United States backed a failed invasion attempt to overthrow Castro.
And authorities assembled thousands in cities and villages for patriotic rallies. As in the past, these rallies are designed to whip up hate of what Castro calls Yankee imperialistic warmongers. To suggestions that a UN team inspect missile sites, Castro said that they had better come ready for combat. He went on to call President Kennedy a pirate for setting up the quarantine.
In 1962, in response to the Bay of Pigs invasion, it was discovered that the Soviet Union had deployed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Kennedy's response was a combination of diplomatic negotiations and a military blockade of Cuba.
Not content with Dr. Castro's oath of fealty, not content with the destruction of Cuban independence, not content with the extension of Soviet power into the Western Hemisphere.
The missiles would have given the Soviet Union the capability to strike major cities in the United States. U-2 spy planes discovered the missile sites in Cuba. The president, John F. Kennedy, was informed of the existence of the missiles the following day. Instead of opting for immediate military action, Kennedy pursued a diplomatic approach. Kennedy assembled a group of advisors called the Executive Committee of the National Security Council to discuss possible actions.
Meanwhile, the United States continues to reinforce its Cuban base at Guantanamo Bay, the naval depot that Castro wants the U.S. to give up. These Marines have been assigned the job of protecting the base against any Cuban threats that might arise during the present crisis. They'll be on a 24-hour alert, a first line of defense.
They debated several options, including a military invasion or an airstrike to destroy the missiles. During this phone call, the subject at hand, unidentified flying objects in Soviet airspace, and wanting confirmation from the United States president himself that they were not U.S. spy planes. Soviets tracked and observed an unknown number of unidentified flying objects in Soviet airspace. Soviet personnel immediately assumed that they were spy planes from the United States, and it's highly believed that they almost fired at them. President Kennedy was on the call and gave direct confirmation from the United States that they were not in fact military vehicles doing a reconnaissance mission. The Soviet Union did not fire on these aircraft. On October 22nd, Kennedy announced a naval quarantine around Cuba to prevent the Soviet weapons from reaching the island. The U.S. Navy blockaded Cuba, preventing Soviet ships from delivering more missiles. Behind the scenes, secret negotiations took place between Kennedy and Khrushchev. There were moments of extreme tensions, with both sides exchanging strong messages.
In the greatest display of hemisphere solidarity since World War II, the Organization of American States unanimously endorses the actions of the United States, and many pledge arms and men to the cause.
But eventually, an agreement was reached. On October 28th, through intense negotiation, he reached an agreement with the Soviet leader, eventually leading to the removal of Soviet missiles from Cuba and American missiles from Turkey.
The U.S. resolution was firm and strongly worded.
Mr. President, I am submitting today a resolution to the Security Council designed to find a way out of this calamitous situation. This resolution calls, as an interim measure under Article 40 of the Charter, for the immediate dismantling and withdrawal from Cuba of all missile and other offensive weapons. It further authorizes and requests the Acting Secretary General to dispatch to Cuba a United Nations Observer Corps to assure and report on compliance with this resolution. Upon UN certification of compliance, it calls for the termination of the measures of quarantine against military shipments to Cuba. And in conclusion, it urgently recommends that the United States and the Soviet Union confer promptly on measures to remove the existing threat to the security of the Western Hemisphere and the peace of the world, and to report thereon to the Security Council.
Khrushchev agreed to dismantle the missile sites in Cuba in exchange for a public pledge from the United States not to invade Cuba, and a secret agreement to remove U.S. missiles in Turkey.
The vote is 20-0, with Cuba absent, commending the U.S. for its efforts to bring about the dismantling of the missile bases. The organization votes the use of armed force to carry out the resolution sponsored by Secretary of State Dean Rusk, thus uniting all of the Americas in a common cause.
The crisis marked a turning point in the Cold War, as both superpowers realized the dangers of nuclear escalation. It led to the establishment of a direct hotline between Washington, D.C. and Moscow, now known as the Red Telephone, to improve communication. JFK successfully navigated the tense standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union, eventually reaching a peaceful resolution. His leadership and diplomatic efforts helped defuse the crisis and averted the potential catastrophe. This was a defining moment in JFK's presidency and a critical point in the Cold War relations. The Cuban Missile Crisis is widely considered the closest the world has come to nuclear war, and it highlights the importance of diplomacy and the communication in resolving conflicts.
A final chapter in the Cuban crisis is brought to a close as President Kennedy holds a news conference to announce that Soviet bombers on Cuban soil would be withdrawn by Russia. These are the planes that Castro claimed he would not relinquish. But Mr. Kennedy says that he has a pledge right from the Kremlin.
I have today been informed by Chairman Khrushchev that all of the IL-28 bombers now in Cuba will be withdrawn in 30 days. He also agrees that these planes can be observed and counted as they leave. Inasmuch as this goes a long way towards reducing the danger which faced this hemisphere 4 weeks ago, I have this afternoon instructed the Secretary of Defense to lift our naval quarantine. We will not, of course, abandon the political, economic, and other efforts of this hemisphere to halt subversion from Cuba, nor our purpose and hope that the Cuban people shall someday be truly free. But these policies are very different from any intent to launch a military invasion of the island. May I add this final thought? In this week of Thanksgiving, there is much for which we can be grateful. As we look back to where we stood only 4 weeks ago, the unity of this hemisphere, the support of our allies, and the calm determination of the American people. These qualities may be tested many more times in this decade, but we have increased reason to be confident that those qualities will continue to serve the cause of freedom with distinction in the years to come.
By 1963, the Soviet Union had a genuine interest in UFO sightings, as they were considered a potential threat to national security. The government and military saw these encounters as possible evidence of advanced foreign aircraft or espionage activities. The Soviets established several research groups to investigate UFO sightings. The most notable organization was the Scientific Technical Committee, which was responsible for studying anomalies in the sky, including UFOs. Multiple sightings were reported to and investigated by this committee. They were less open about UFO sightings compared to some other countries. Information regarding sightings was generally not released to the public unless the government deemed it necessary. UFO reports were closely guarded to prevent panic or misinformation. The Soviet Union aimed to approach UFO sightings from a scientific perspective. Investigators and scientists made efforts to collect data, conduct interviews, and analyze physical evidence when available. They sought to identify natural or man-made explanations and only considered extraterrestrial origins as a last resort. Similar to other countries during the Cold War era, the Soviet Union had a practice of classifying sensitive information. UFO reports often fell into this category due to national security concerns. As a result, many documents related to UFO encounters were not accessible to the general public. It's worth noting that access to detailed information about the Soviet Union's approach to UFO sightings during the 1960s can be limited, as many documents remain classified or have not been widely shared. President John F. Kennedy expressed his desire to remove U.S. military advisors from Vietnam and ultimately end American involvement in the Vietnam War. His efforts to ease tensions and pursue a peaceful resolution to the Cold War set important foundations for future presidents in their pursuit of diplomatic solutions. He worked towards a nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviet Union, which eventually led to the signing of the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963. Kennedy signed this treaty with the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom, banning atmospheric nuclear testing. This move was aimed at reducing nuclear tensions and establishing trust between the two superpowers. Dated 10 days prior to the death of President Kennedy, the release of this memo came out in 2010, and its origins are not quite clear. This appears to be a top secret document that may have been typed up by President Kennedy or someone with direct contact to him. It's addressed to the Central Intelligence Agency, asking for all information involving and related to unidentified flying objects. President Kennedy is asking the CIA to gather this information and to have it prepped and prepared to be shared with the Soviet Union. There are some inconsistencies that most historians have put out in regards to the authenticity of this JFK memo to the Central Intelligence Agency. For example, a top secret document that was once classified and becomes declassified has that official stamp and some sort of catalog number that would be referenced somewhere on the page. Most top secret documents that are later declassified, in most cases, are extremely hard to read and look like they were ran through a Xerox machine more than a few times. This JFK memo is very clear and easy to understand for a document that was produced in 1963. Whether this document was typed by JFK himself or someone within the White House is up for debate. And until further concrete evidence is provided, we will leave it up to you to decide on the authenticity of this document.
I share the sense of shock and dismay that the entire nation must feel at the despicable act that took the life of the nation's president. On the personal side, Mrs. Eisenhower and I share the grief that Mrs. Kennedy must now feel. And we send to her our prayerful thoughts and sympathetic sentiments in this hour.
General, how would you counsel the American people at this time?
In the face of such a terrible thing, I'm sure the entire citizenry of the nation will join as one man in expressing not only their grief, but their indignation at this act, and will stand faithfully behind the government.
General, could you tell us how you got the word?
I was at a meeting for the United Nations, and while there, a member of the meeting was called out and came back and told us the news. Although at that time, we did not know the president was dead. We did not know when I got back here at that time that he was dead. But, matter of fact, we had the last message we had was one rather of hope. And the entire company merely paused for a minute at the request of the chairman, and each of us, in his own way, said a silent prayer for the President.
Should there be any concern, sir, over national security at a time like this?
No, I think the whole nation now would be almost all of us security agents.
Will the nation be all right in the few months ahead?
Oh, I'm not going to predict anything of that. I just say this. The American nation is a people of great common sense, and they are not going to be stampeded or bewildered.
Thank you, Mr. President. History have assassinations affected the political course of events?
Well, of course, in Lincoln's assassination, the presidency went to a man who was a registered Democrat, Mr. Johnson. In Garfield, I doubt that there was any. And, of course, in McKinley, that brought in Theodore Roosevelt. Of course, there have been other attempts in late years. Mr. Truman was at a grave threat to his life, and Mr. Roosevelt, just before he was inaugurated, you remember, down when Mayor Cermak was killed, ran a very grave risk. These things have happened, and it seems inexplicable to me, because Americans are loyal, and it's just this occasional psychopathic sort of accident that occurs, and I don't know what we can do about it.
Could you say anything, General, about how people will feel abroad from all your experience with the United Nations and others? How will it be taken abroad?
Well, I think they will be a bit bewildered. This, in the civilized countries of the world, this doesn't happen so often. And you remember in the starting of World War I, the murder of the Archduke Ferdinand, I think his name was. Why, this itself almost one of the contributory causes to that war. And but here, I just don't know what happens. But we are a nation where our freedoms are allowed or are observed in such a way that everybody is ready everybody is, you might say, capable of doing this if he's ready to put his own life on the line.
How will you spend the rest of today and tomorrow? How will you spend the rest of today and
I have canceled the dinner date that I had for tonight. Tomorrow, I'm going immediately to my home, and if I'm wanted for any purpose whatsoever, I will, of course, be available.
Would you have any advice for the American people at this time?
No, as I said, I know the American people will stand solid, and they will not be stampeded.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Good night, fellows.
His impact and legacy continue to hold a significant place in history. The official investigation by the United States government, known as the Warren Commission, concluded in 1964 that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The investigation did not find evidence of CIA involvement in the assassination. There are several theories that have emerged over the years involving the CIA and its potential connection to JFK's assassination. Please note that these theories are speculative and lack substantial evidence. Some conspiracy theorists believe that elements within the CIA orchestrated the assassination to remove President Kennedy, as they deemed him a threat due to his policies and desire to reduce the agency's influence. The Bay of Pigs theory suggests that JFK's handling of the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, which was a CIA-led operation, angered certain members of the CIA. This theory proposes that the CIA collaborated with organized crime to eliminate JFK. Proponents assert that the CIA and the Mafia had shared interest in Cuba, gambling operations, and other illicit activities, creating a motive to remove the president. It's important to emphasize that these theories are not widely accepted by the mainstream or supported by concrete evidence. The vast majority of historians and experts consider the Warren Commission's conclusion that Oswald acted alone as the most plausible explanation. These theories lack substantial evidence and are widely disputed. The majority of credible historians and experts agree with the Warren Commission's findings. His presidency became known for its focus on civil rights, the space race, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. However, his time in office was tragically cut short when he was assassinated. The subject of UFOs remains a topic of debate and speculation. While some people believe that these sightings provide evidence of extraterrestrial life or advanced technology, others argue that most UFO sightings can be explained by natural phenomena, human error, or psychological factors.
Then we must be bold. I'm the one who's doing all the work, so just going to stay cool for a minute. However, I think we're going to do it. And I think that we must pay what needs to be paid. I don't think we ought to waste any money, but I think we ought to do the job. And this will be done in the decade of the 60s. It may be done while some of you are still here at school at this college and university. It will be done during the terms of office of some of the people who sit here on this platform. But it will be done, and it will be done before the end of this decade. And I am delighted that this university is playing a part in putting a man on the moon as part of a great national effort of the United States of America.
Good night, honey.
I share the sense of shock and dismay that the entire nation must feel at the despicable act that took the life of the nation's president.
Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there. And new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous, greatest invention man has ever embarked.